going to start. I have to script my talks, so I can never be a teacher. I lose track, I go off on tangents, I forget what I'm saying, I don't keep to time, so just forgive me, but I have to script my talks. I'll try not to skip over this. So, first and foremost, I am a mum, and I happen to also have a child severely affected by CVI who is considered profoundly disabled and obviously blind due to his brain, not his eyes, and he was registered blind when he was a baby, but I'm not here to talk about him. But here's a photo anyway. His name is Aaron, after the Scottish Island. And I'm not here to talk about him because Aaron, he is the tiniest tip of an enormous invisible iceberg, and that is people with CVI, the vast majority of whom don't know they've got it, but they will find some things difficult. And what I'm going to try to do in this workshop is to explain a little bit about how many there are, who they are, where they are, and what to do when you find them. Not on this list is what is CVI. I'm hoping to help you understand what it is to experience the world as someone with CVI may, and in doing this it will explain a little bit about some of the CVIs that are so often missed that cause the difficulties the majority of people affected by CVI have problems with. I have spent thousands of hours studying this subject. The charity we created with the internet resources, they've been translated into 110 languages and they're used by 135 countries. And I don't feel I have even scratched the surface of this condition. So, limited by time this morning, my aim is just to provide a taster. So hopefully you will want to go away and learn a bit more. And if I achieve that, without question, children will benefit. So, how many? The answer is a lot. It's estimated around 3 to 5% of the population. So that would be up to 250,000 people in Scotland with a medical condition they don't know they have. It may be higher. And the truth is, we really don't know for sure. But what about in schools? There is a multi-million-pound research project. It's based in Bristol, and it's called the CVI Project, and it's looking at children with undiagnosed CVI in mainstream schools. They've yet to publish their findings, but they have suggested there will be children with undiagnosed CVI in all mainstream schools. There was a BBC documentary, it was called Not in Plain Sight, about undiagnosed children. That's where this claim was made. I've got a printed sheet at the front with all the links and stuff that I refer to in this for afterwards if you want it. So think about how many children you've taught. Almost certainly you would have taught children with unknown CVIs. So which ones were they? Who might they be of the children you currently teach? Who might they be of the children you have previously taught? I'll give you some clues. A child with undiagnosed CVI is likely to be affected by one or more of the following. Difficulties with reading and writing. Sometimes these may be attributed to dyslexia, not always correctly. Difficulty staying focused and being easily distracted, sometimes seeming disruptive. A need for extreme order and anxiety, even great distress when that order is broken, or new things, new people, new foods, or new places are introduced. A choice of social isolation and withdrawing, sometimes becoming depressed. Challenging behaviours where they can seem to lash out, sometimes violently. Totally losing control towards themselves or others, sometimes for no obvious reason. A dislike of certain sports, most often the fast-moving team competitive sports, but at school the child may just avoid all sports. And no obvious signs whatsoever to the observer. You will know that children are very good at keeping their difficulties to themselves. The need to be and look normal, whatever that is, means that anything that they don't think isn't normal needs to be kept very well hidden. So this isn't a comprehensive list. And while some children who fit into the above category may have CVI, not all will. and because there are other issues that can cause the same difficulties. And the other issues, just to give some of their names: autism, ADHD, DCD, sometimes called dyspraxia, dyslexia. The different names for learning and developmental delays and difficulties, and crossing the grey line between what are considered learning and behavioural conditions into mental health problems, where the need for routine becomes obsessive, and depression can follow, in severe cases including thoughts of suicide. So CVI can cause all of these, but it is not going to be the cause in every case. And the challenge is working out which ones. So that's just a sort of like a small list. The actual list is obviously much bigger, but this is where CVIs do lie hidden in some of these conditions. So that estimate of 3 to 5% of the population, in these groups, we would expect that to be higher, that higher proportion would be affected by CVI. And in those who are affected, CVI might be able to explain some of their difficulties, but there could be other issues in addition to CVI. So it's complicated. Each child is complicated, with or without CVI. It is a puzzle, but it is a solvable puzzle with the correct understanding. And with the understanding matched to the child's actual known difficulties, we know, because we have repeated first-hand experience, that lives can and are transformed. So what is CVI? Most simply, it is a visual impairment caused by the brain, not the eyes. And the problem is that we think of vision as the picture we see. But the picture is just one element of our visual world. And for most, it is not where the difficulties lie. So one way to explain it is to think of the visual brain as a cast of characters. And as I go through them, what I'd like to do is just think about the role each character is playing in what you are seeing right now. So the first character is the Renaissance artist Leonardo da Vinci. And in his workstation, which is in an area of the brain called the primary visual cortex, Da Vinci has a razor-sharp pencil, and he draws what you are looking at in very fine detail. So if you have typical vision, sometimes called 20/20, so for those of us who wear glasses, it's the level to which our eyesight is corrected with our spectacles. We can see clearly something to 1/10 of a millimetre in thickness. So that's around the width of a single human hair at arm's length. Next, a few desks along in your brain, so it's another Renaissance artist. This is Michelangelo, and he has an enormous set of colouring pencils. And Michelangelo colours in what Da Vinci draws, and they work in perfect harmony and synchronicity. But to understand CVI, we need to understand that these are different and separate processes that come together. So the detail you see and the colour framed by your visual field, this is the picture. And this is what is tested when you have an eye test. And if the picture is okay, as it is for the vast majority of people affected by CVI, then for most, vision is not considered a cause of difficulties. So next, we're going to move on to the processes that are the troublemakers. And the processes I'm going to start talking about are the ones that are behind some of the difficulties. So next we have Steven Spielberg, and he's got his moving camera, and he is in charge of filming the action. So he's in charge of movement, and he makes sure that everything that you were looking at moves. If it's my hand, is correctly added to the picture that your brain has created. So when I move, your brain is processing that movement and adding it to the picture, and the processing of the movement is another separate process. So the picture of what you're looking at right now, it's multiple processes coming together in your brain. So when you see an image the brain creates, it should match what you were looking at in terms of detail, colour and movement. Now, if you couldn't see the detail so well, it would be picked up on a standard eye test. You wouldn't be able to read the small letters at the bottom of the optician's chart. But what if your brain wasn't processing movement so well? So, I mean, ideally, the brain your world recreates should match the real world. And this is across all of your senses, not just vision. But we have limits. So if things are moving too fast, they can't be seen clearly. And this is the case for all of us. But for some, things don't have to be moving so fast to not be seen so clearly. So speeding cars are difficult for us all to see. But slower cars, maybe moving around a car park or a suburban street, for some they may not be seen clearly. So what else moves fast? Facial expressions. The vast majority of our facial expressions are fleeting and subtle, so not like this. 90% or more of an emotional message is non-verbal. That means it's somehow communicated through facial expressions and body language. If you are visually processing movement so that fast movements are missed, and this includes missing many emotional communications, how is that going to affect your social development? And also, if movement is not seen when it would be expected to be seen, things will be missed without explanation. So think about how you use movement when teaching, in your body language, in the looks you give to convey a different message, how you gesticulate, and then what moves in the lesson as things are explained, and not just things like where videos are used, but practical lessons like in science and sport. Things are missed, but here's the thing, they aren't known to be missed as they weren't seen. So things will not make as much sense, making all aspects of learning more difficult without explanation, other than that maybe the child isn't concentrating. The strategy, slow things down. Simple, make it slow enough and the child who does not process movement so well can learn. So that's the first of the troublemakers. The next is a character I have called Accordion Lady. So we've got a picture, colour, detail, it's moving, it's in your head, hello. And next we have the real world though, it's not flat, and in addition to height and width, it also has depth, and depth is added to the picture in another place in your brain. It is another separate process, and the depth your brain creates should correctly put things where they are so that you can reach for things with accuracy. It's very difficult to think of the depth map without the picture, as the depth map sort of cloaks the visual information. And the reason I use the accordion lady is because I think of the depth map like an accordion or concertina, where you're all sort of in the right place depth-wise across the room, going further away. And this is why I stick to my script, because I guess go off and it's just sort of gone. And everything's correct place at the correct distance. But what if the depth map was not so accurate, even just a little bit out? Reaching for something like a cup would be, you know where it is to reach for it because your brain has placed it there. But what if your brain is wrong and it has put it in the wrong place? So my brain is telling me it's here when really it's here. And this is where you've really got to get to grasp with the fact that the visual world is inside your brain, and it's the elements of it that don't match the real world on the outside where the problems are. So things, if the brain isn't mapping things so well, even just slightly out, will not be where you think they are, and you may seem a little clumsy, or for the more severely affected, very clumsy. And we reach not just with our arms and hands, but with our whole bodies as we move through the world. So think again about sports where people are moving fast. If that map of where things are is not so good, how is that going to affect things like football and netball? But you wouldn't know your depth map was not so accurate. You would just think you were naturally clumsy, a bit rubbish, naturally not very good at sports. So here the strategy is a bit more complex, and it's about being aware and learning to do things like reach for things slowly, just like maybe with a discreet outstretched little finger, so that you can find where things are tactily before picking them up, so that you're less clumsy. And appreciate that there are going to be things that may never be easy, like sports with many players, but that doesn't mean all sports are out. Swimming, running and athletics, it might be better matches. And there is a flip side to this particular difficulty. If your brain is not putting things where they should be, then your brain might be calculating an imminent collision because it has put something that may be far away as close up. And I first got my head around this talking to a mum who explained that her son loved to walk in front of her shopping trolley in the supermarket, but he would often brace himself when there was nothing there. Apart from his brain was putting things in the wrong place and calculating imminent collisions reacting to a threat, and it was triggering fight or flight, and we're going to come to that. The places with lots to put in the right place, like a supermarket, they're always going to be difficult, whereas an open beach has much less to map and much less to get wrong. Which is why one of the possible signs of the depth map not being so accurate is a dislike of cluttered places, because there is a lot to map and to get wrong, and where things are moving, which includes if the child is moving, they will become anxious, but they won't know why, because this is not their conscious brain working things out. These are non-conscious brain calculations, where both movement and the depth map are not processed so accurately together, even just slightly. This combination is not uncommon. They are right next to each other in the brain. These problems become much, much greater for the child. So, next to our party, we have Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson, who watches everything, and he can use his telescope when he wants to look at something. So as you're looking at this image of Nelson, your visual attention, which is a bit like looking through the telescope, focuses on one thing. But for some, this ability to point the telescope and focus at one thing is much more difficult. Some can't keep it fixed on the same thing. Others can't find things. Some have a tiny, tiny little telescope to see through, maybe seeing through something as small as a straw. And these problems of visual attention are the areas we think are most common, and it's particularly problematic because for most it varies, and they can go from seeing typically to having considerable visual challenges, sometimes within seconds, based on their environment and changes in how they are feeling. But they are not aware that their vision has changed. Things just become more difficult. And as they try to stay focused and keep it together, they lose concentration. I've a first-hand experience of this. We're working with St Andrews University on a project, and I had to film in this particular way to create the film for a simulation. So essentially, I was moving with reduced visual attention, and in doing that, I tripped over things. I thought I was going to get hit in the face with a carrier bag. I forgot what I was doing, and I fell down a hole. And the only way I can explain it is it's like someone presses a pause button on your attention, and there's actually a film of me filming this way saying, look at that hole, this is where I fall down a hole, and then I fell down the hole. And it's just like that someone just paused what I was doing, and you kind of have to work out what you've missed and fill in the gap. It's really difficult.
Can I ask you a question? Actually, when you were talking about the telescope thing, do you mean it like 1 minute you can like you focus on one thing and then it gets narrower, like to it's only the size of a straw that you're seeing?
It can do, yeah, and wider. That's and people don't know it's getting narrower though. So our party has more guests. All of our cast members are supported by an enormous group of runners who take information all over the brain. So when you see someone you know, maybe a friend, one runner takes the visual information. I've got to stop pointing to my bits of the brain here. So just the visual takes from here to here to here to a library of faces, and another runner takes it to your library of names. And if they find a match, they run up to your frontal lobes, your conscious brain, and they let you know it's Mandy, and you can correctly greet Mandy. And if you want to give Mandy a hug, you will know where she is to hug her because your depth map has correctly placed her. So you won't miss her and hug thin air, or be slightly out and accidentally knock into her. Any of these processes might not be working so well, and even if just slightly out, can play havoc with all elements of learning, social relationships, and developing confidence to be independent. Not done yet though. Next we have Usain Bolt, sitting on a watchtower overlooking everything, the fastest person on earth. So Bolt has his own set of runners, which are, of course, the fastest, and they are looking for anything that might come in the side, and when they see something that is moving in from the side, they make a super quick decision, and a runner is sent, maybe to make you blink. And if you walk through the woods and a tree pings up, that blink, that is your blind sight, it's called, that makes you blink. And if something runs in the car from the side and you hit the brakes, the chances are you have hit the brakes before you have consciously processed what's happening, and that's a non-conscious type of reflex vision that is super, super fast. If something is thought dangerous, a super fast runner wakes up the beast. The beast is kept sleeping but is woken if you're in danger. And the beast has two strategies, fight or flight. And the beast also has chemical weapons to make you faster, stronger and more alert. But if you aren't really in danger, as is often the case when these visual processes aren't working so well, the beast will be released unnecessarily, leaving the child charged and ready for battle, and without any obvious reason why. And it is not a nice feeling. We all know what that feeling is when you're sort of like surged with adrenaline and those chemicals. And then overseeing everything is the bridge. A bit like the bridge of a ship with radar, checking everything that you can see, including the majority of what you see that you're not actually looking at. So if something is interesting, is spotted on the radar, like maybe a chocolate ice cream, a runner will be dispatched to a part of your brain called the pons, and will send a message back to your eyes to look at that. And once that instruction is received, and so fast you won't be aware of it, Lord Nelson will take his telescope and he will point it with extraordinary accuracy and locate the ice cream you weren't even looking at. And that is how I'm blown away by how clever all of this is. And every time we open our eyes, this extraordinary team of performers come together, working together, supporting each other to create our visual world. And the purpose of these performers, it is to protect and to inform, so that you can learn and make sense of the world around you as it moves. Any one of these characters might not be working so well. And where this is the case, the child will find things difficult, but they will not know why. CVI is the most hidden disability, hidden in the non-conscious parts of the brain, hidden even from the person affected and those closest to them. And it only takes one of our performers to be slightly underperforming to have a knock-on effect on all of the others and make life difficult. And rather than protecting you, you might be in danger because you miss things or bump into things. And rather than helping you learn and make sense of your world, you become confused. And both life and learning are difficult to make sense of. Any one of our performers can underperform, or a combination of them. And when they do, this is what can lead to cerebral visual impairment. So that's a little bit about the cerebral visual impairments, and to look at the earlier questions of who they are and where they are, well, the answer is it could be anyone, anywhere. In certain groups that we've already talked about, where there are sort of reading and writing difficulties and some behavioural problems, where CVI is more likely, but someone who seems to have no difficulties can also have CVI. They're just maybe very good at covering up their difficulties. So what to do when you find them? Well, there is a diagnostic process here in London through VINCIP. I've got links here, which is the Visual Impairment Network for Children and Young People. It is a medical condition, so it would require a medical diagnosis, but each affected person is different. But anything that reduces the demands on the visual brain will help, particularly in the classroom, which can be noisy, busy and cluttered. So I feel like I've missed a slide here. I can't see what that one is. No, it's not. Just a lot more text for a slide than I would normally do. Just sort of like a lot of the strategies to support a child with CVI will help all children. So think of how many things your brain can do at once. Few people can read and listen well at the same time. And if you try going home, put on Radio 4, and then try to listen to the radio and read a book at the same time. And then think of presentations where you are listening, taking notes, reading complex slides. As your attention moves to one area, it leaves the other. So I've used a little understanding about the brain, and I've deliberately made these slides today so that they can be processed in no more than 2 seconds, most less than 1. And once the slide is processed, for the other few minutes that it's on screen, there will be a reserve in your brain, which I want. Because I know this is a really difficult subject to explain, because it requires a leap of faith into a world that is not your own. So I really do want to hope that you will listen to me, because I really want to interest you in this, and I really want you to sort of want to go away and learn a bit more, because if you do, the children will benefit when we just know this. So thinking about the slide wasn't a trick, it's just my understanding of how the brain calibrates attention and gets that stuff called knowledge from the outside into the mind of those teaching, into the minds of those learning. And how the brain calibrates and how the brain learns are two completely intertwined processes. And so I've got a few links here about that, but basically what we do is we sweep up everything around us across our 5 main senses. That's one end of the process, from the outside going in. And then the other end of the process is our conscious attention, that part of our mind that is alert and awake and listening and learning. And what there is in between is a great deal of completely unnecessary waste. So if someone pushed a trolley of bacon sandwiches past outside so we could all smell them, some of us might love it, some of us might hate it, but just by smelling them, a little bit of our attention would have shifted elsewhere. And as the bacon sandwiches are not relevant to this talk this morning, that's a little bit of wasted attention across this whole class. Sounds, they are another great cause of waste. So if thinking of a class during a lesson, so in addition to the teacher talking, and children when they are answering questions and participating, and maybe sort of different medias that are used as part of the lesson, what else is heard that is not part of the lesson? So a ticking clock, child drumming their fingers on the desk or chewing gum, phones vibrating, a lawnmower outside, people talking outside, loud cars, sirens, talking in the corridors. It's all waste. Go back to listening to Radio 4 and reading a book. I mean, that was quite a different example, but all of these little distractions, they create waste, and the biggest cause of waste of them all is of that incredible brain. A massive 40% is estimated to be responsible for processing vision. Of all the inputs from all the senses, by far the biggest, and it processes and maps everything in the visual field, not what is just being looked at. Visual clutter is waste. So if you think of your classrooms, unless something is necessary to the lesson in hand, so you want the child to be looking at it and not at you, or their books or the board, then it is waste. And this is the case for all children. For the brain, the ideal teaching environment is naturally well lit and completely clutter-free. Galleries know this, and just like this painting, the teacher should be the star of their classroom, the person with the incredible gift of knowledge to share, and the teacher should be just as easy to see, listen to and learn from. Where there is CVI, there is more to learn, like if someone needs things to slow down for certain children, and recognising which children they are, how much things need to be slowed down. But actually, even just these few changes with the understanding of unnecessary waste across the senses, that will help all children, particularly those who may be struggling from the difficulties I've mentioned earlier, autism, ADHD, etc. But so not just children with CVI, but for the child with CVI, known or unknown, these often small changes can make a huge difference between learning and not learning. Although not all children with CVI have significant needs. Some are extremely able, but they may just have 1 or 2 things they struggle with, like hockey, for example, just very mildly affected. What we really want to do is to encourage people to think about CVI, particularly the difficulties I've mentioned today, and they're all, we call them the higher visual processing difficulties, and to look at where children do struggle and think if CVI could be the cause. So I've brought some of our guides for parents here. They're actually guides for anybody. We kind of got the payment on the ground, so guide for parents. But please do feel free to take one away, and I've all the references and things I've got on a piece of paper there. Are there any questions?
Is it like a test to see, so if you think you've got somebody in your class who is experiencing some of these things, can you get them tested for CVI?
You can. It's that there are questions that can be asked, and it's a really tricky area as to who could be asking the questions, because the volumes of people, children, like tens and tens of thousands of people, and there are just not enough sort of pediatricians to quote that. So the questions are things like difficulties going downstairs but not upstairs, and that's because of it's very common to have a lower visual field impairment. It's all the same part of the brain. Another one is sort of standing here looking at you all. If someone said, "Could you see the lady in the black top?" and if you imagine what I was talking about Nelson with his, so someone with reduced visual attention, rather than being able to sort of like see the whole room and very quickly to narrow it down, would be sort of almost doing this, and they're getting little bits of the picture and trying very hard. And actually, to find the lady in the black top, it's almost down to luck. So we're kind of early days, but really sort of like upping the profile of CVI, and the system, we're sort of keeping an eye on it as to sort of how it's managing. So that through diagnosis there are these sorts of questions which would be a strong indicator, and then there are sort of following set of there's 5 questions like that. Difficulty picking imagine a pile of washing, saying pick up the red top, you know, and that should be something that is a split second thing that most of us can do, and if it takes a bit of looking, then that's, and you know, apply that to the red pen in a thing of pens, or toys in a toy box, that sort of thing. And then so there are 5 questions, of which 3, if answered yes most of the time, would be a strong enough indicator that it'd be worth going to the next level. And then you've got, so there's a 50 set questions, and then following on from that, it would be referral for diagnosis.
Doctor you would go to, or would it be the optician, or who would you?
Well, technically you can refer through the GP to VINSIP if CBI is recognised. We've got a lot on the website, and the documentary has a lot, but I think what's going to happen in practice is that the system, there's going to be a point where there's more people going through, because it is these massive undiagnosed people, and it's not like if you've got someone who's very mildly affected, maybe just with a lower visual field impairment. Yeah, so what if you stand up and you sort of like see, you should be able to see your tip of your foot around about here, and that's actually where you. That's the reason for that, so that you can sort of have some slightly low vision. And for some people, if it's sort of all the way up here, that's a very strong indicator, and they're going to find any sort of sports with a ball difficult and stuff. But that might be all they have, so they're not necessarily going to need sort of like long-term intensive sort of like therapy and support. They're just going to be excused from hockey.
Yeah.
It's just and so it's not the case that every single person is going to have profound. But for those who already do, because where these are present from birth and not understood, and if you imagine just sort of like people are expecting you to learn from your world around you, and actually you can only see bits at a time just by looking through this tunnel, which is tested. It seems normal, where it's so often the case. I'm sure it says vision, but then it's been tested and it seems absolutely fine. But so we at the moment, our advice is if you suspect CVI, we tell people to go to their GP if they don't have a paediatrician. Often paediatricians are every 6 months to a year, so they might want to see a GP because it's quicker. And we give them a link to the VINSIP website, which has got the CVI diagnostic pathway. And but we also know from feedback coming back that not all GPs are doing that, and it's people are getting sent around the houses a little bit. And we are dealing with very senior people in VINSIP, and just sort of like saying, kind of need to sort this out, because this is just going to get, there's going to get more and more pressure on the system. And so yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So technically GP should do it, and if they don't, you can send them to us, and we're sort of like trying to sort of like follow things through and put people in the right places.
I think that's the difficulty in a classroom. Many of these things could be a lot of things, and that is very different professionals that are dealing with that. You almost need somebody with an overall awareness. You know, when you're having a meeting about a child, a health professional who's aware of this, because for the teacher in the classroom, they're noting the difficulties. They're not in the diagnostic thing. It's great to hear this today, but you almost need to know where to.
See, those 5 questions you're talking about, is it something that we can access somewhere before we go to the doctor stage? Because that's the kind of thing that I think would be really helpful for us.
What I'll do is, and I know Juliet at the back, so there are issues where parents have tried to play the system in the past, and I think because it's a sort of pre-diagnostic criteria, because the diagnosis of, because this puts you in the world of visual impairments, even though you might be mildly affected, and then you sort of start to tick box to access support. And that sounds really horrible, but and it's not certainly been my personal experience of anyone I know, but I know from sort of like senior doctors in the area that they're quite. So I've just given you 2 of them anyway. So it's just like but they are quite protective. But it is actually available. But what I might do is, if there's a way of feeding back through this post-conference, is actually speaking to the sort of like people in Scotland that we work with who are around sort of like diagnosing, and actually just sort of seeing, well, how can we make it easier for a teacher in a school. We've just in Fife employed a person who is going to be specialising in this, just to sort of test it in an area. And but yeah, and actually it might be that the person might not want to go down a full diagnostic route. They might just realise it and just say, okay, well that's interesting.
Like that,
Yeah, we know that visual clutter. So actually, you won't be at the back of the room because you've got all these heads in front of you. You need to be at the front of the room, and or a corner where the classroom. I mean, classroom is a real issue for all children. And so there might be just little strategies that they can then just take through the rest of their lives for them, just to help understand and just to help separate. I mean, the CVI and problems with processing sound really go very closely together as well, and it's about the whole how the brain. So looking at you, I can look at you and concentrate on you, and actually all these other people are in here, but I can just do that quite nicely and easily. And some people can't do that, and if there's listening for there's a fan somewhere, and some people wouldn't be able to drain out the fan, and it's how brains calibrate and kind of have a level, top down, bottom up, if you come up with it, and as to sort of distractions levels, and that's all kind of feeds into it. Hello.
And I'm just thinking about this in a school situation. The people who direct the kind of support are generally educational psychologists. And I'm just wondering if part of your target group to bring them on board, would it be useful to you to look at them as a group? I wrote a guide about supporting schools, which is not on that link there, but it's really for parents to just sort of like walk through their child's day, looking through their child's eyes to see little things that might be missed, like a queue for assembly or something, like just a stupid thing that is going to be enough to knock them off for 3 hours. And we looked at educational psychologists, and I went through everyone I knew in the whole VI world across the whole of England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, and no one could come up with a single educational psychologist with experience in CVI. And people kind of they have this, I hate it, it's like this complex needs with low vision where they kind of lump it into a condition which really just sort of says they don't really understand what's happening in the brain, as I've tried to explain to you a little bit today, because you have to pick out which bit is wrong. That just processing movement slightly out is such a simple thing to resolve, but you have to be able to extract it from a lot of complicated processes. And so we couldn't find a single one, but we have there is in training, and she's one of our associates, her name's Fiona Gorey, and she's just doing her training as an educational psychologist, and she is like presenting on CVI and stuff like that. And I think, yeah, but I mean, the issue is that they have such little time with children as well. But it is, I think, we need to sort of like go away and just like think, it's one thing just really raising the profile of this condition, but then you've got, well, hundreds of thousands, not if you go across the adult population, what are we going to do with them all? And it's just sort of like, it's just sort of like the education psychologists need to know as well, maybe you can introduce this to some. I'm just thinking that having come from a special education background, that's the route that we'd have to report to actually suit you with
The problem is that most of them just haven't heard of it and are not terribly interested. That for them, these children are profoundly disabled in special schools, and they have no sense of the children who. That's why that BBC documentary is really good, actually, because it shows children in mainstream schools who are just struggling, and these children in the documentary have got that they probably have greater difficulties, but there are some that you just wouldn't notice, and it's part of our conversation forward is just sort of like, the practicalities of sort of identifying and supporting people who are affected by this. Thank you.
Sending children down a mental health route when it's a physiological problem. That's a concern, isn't it?
It is, and the things that I mean, just from my own personal experience, people I know people who have considered suicide, where this part of their condition hasn't been understood, and they are just so. Just something like not recognising someone, which is such an easy thing to do. I mean, I'm not very good with faces or names myself, and I'm constantly apologising for it. But people think that you're being aloof or indifferent, and just and then imagine it's like you're going up through school. So we followed a 3-year-old. It was just two psychologists we were working with, and what we're trying to do is show the really thin line between autism and CVI. The mildest level of CVI with reduced visual attention, but really his autistic behaviours couldn't be in the main explained as CVI, and that's why I was trying to sort of say it's going to be the case in some, but not all, and in some it will be a combination of things. And what you could see is him just he went from primary into primary from nursery, so that full day, and just sort of like within 2 days he was getting told off. He's like so heavy-handed with someone on the playground. He's thinking he can't, you know, the movement and stuff like that. He's not sort of like probably not processing them properly. He's probably grabbing hold of people too hard, and all these little things. And over sort of 2 to 3 week period, this bright as a button boy, you could see the behaviours being pulled out of assembly and stuff like that, and you kind of think what's going we try to like say to the parents, you need to sort of like get involved yourselves here, and it's not be the teachers, but you need to sort of like understand your child, explain your child, and if everybody works together, then everybody, you know, we all up our game a bit. And there is still this sense that this is someone else's problem, and so the parent, what they did was they went and they just said, no, actually I've really created a fun. I've got a new educational psychologist, and we were saying, why don't you just go through their school day? You know what things they find difficult. You know if they're packed in somewhere, like sort of sat down on an assembly floor, that's difficult. Just don't do it. You know, the process should not be he's in the class until he wants to explode. The process should be he goes in the class when he's nice and calm, and when he feels it's getting too much, he's allowed to go out and that's a real mindset that I probably had myself, to be honest, to begin with, where I just sort of like you just expect that it's someone else's problem and someone else is going to sort it out. But these are too complex and too detailed and too intertwined with the child's history, learning, development, behaviours, and it needs to be a real joint effort of doing another one, and just like the end of it is just like saying that the teachers are so key when it comes to CVI in helping much more than doctors in this role, with really sort of like playing a supportive, understanding role, but the parents have to do their bit too.
Is it something that you're born with, or can you develop it?
Both.
As
It's anything that affects the brain. So 40% of it is visual processing. So the other end of it is acquired in stroke, dementia, MS, any sort of cancers, brain injuries. If it affects the brain, it's very likely that it's going to touch on a part of the brain that is responsible for one of the, at least, of the elements of visual processing, and there is a knock-on effect to the others. It's just sort of like they are all connected. So